Makers, I'm Catherine from Minerva, and today I'm going to show you how to stitch up the Zoe blouse from Atelier Jupe. So before we begin stitching anything up, we need to gather up all of our materials. And here at Minerva, we have put together a number of different kits for you, including fabric, thread, and everything that you need, and of course, the printed pattern. So let's see what's all included in the kit.
So to start with, we have this beautiful Rayon Challis by Art Gallery in the Bloomsbury pattern here with these gorgeous florals. It is so nice and drapey and just perfect for this pattern. So this is the paper pattern from Atelier Jupe. We have some fusible interfacing here, and then of course we have matching thread and needles.
Now that you've got all of your materials, let's get to stitching.
Okay, so we're going to be prepping the pattern and cutting the fabric out. So with this, you will notice that the seam allowances are not included. So grab that tracing paper. I am just going to be using a quilting ruler to do the straight lines, but go ahead and trace out the size that you would like to make. And once you've got that traced out, I use my quilting ruler because it does have that 3/8 of an inch grid mark on it. So I can trace out that seam allowance, add those grain lines on, and write what your seam allowance is. Now the notches are slightly different. This little squiggle line is actually cut on the fold for the pattern. And you also have two pieces, 1A and 1B, that can be traced out together. So I'm just going to show you how you would tape it together if you didn't trace it all in one piece. So I am just going to tape them together along the line to create that front bodice piece. And then go ahead and cut it out. I am using a rotary cutter that I use only for paper, just because it goes so much faster than using my shears on this. So once that's cut out, I'm just tacking it down along the back here, and our pattern pieces are all done. Next, we are going to be cutting this out. So the pattern pieces for the front and back are cut on the fold. I like to use these washers that I got from the hardware store as pattern weights. And when you are cutting out a Rayon Challis, it is slippery. Using a rotary cutter and mat really helps that out. Now, don't forget to mark those notches on your pattern pieces, especially along the arm side, so that we know the front and back on the sleeve and on that sleeve piece there. So once that is all done, let's move on to the interfacing. So we're actually going to place interfacing on the facing pieces for our blouse. So I'm just going to show you on the back facing, but it's the exact same for your front facing as well. Make sure you place that fusible with the sticky side down, and then of course lay your pressing cloth on top, and then with some steam pressing down on that. Don't rub it back and forth, it will slip and you will get little folds in there. Next, for the bust darts, this will add some really nice shaping. So grab the bust dart and pinch it together. You want to pinch the end of the dart and then match up the legs at the start. Now when you're placing these pins in, you want them to place them so that the point goes towards the legs of the dart, not the point. And always start at the end right here, and then follow along and just pull out your pins as you go. And when you get to that point, do not backstitch, but leave a long thread tail, and then go ahead and tie off that dart point a couple of times. This gives you a perfectly crisp dart at the other end. So then we just need to press those darts, and you want to press them downwards towards the bottom of your blouse here. And once that is done, let's go on to the shoulder seams as well as those side seams. So we're going to place the right sides together of the front and back bodice pieces. First, I'm matching them up at the shoulder seams here. So I just match one end and then the other, and then add an extra pin in the center right here. And then I am going to pin my side seams at the exact same time because we're going to be at our machine anyway, and we have to stitch those up. So just go ahead, make sure when you are pinning that you're pinning that dart down so that even if you're stitching in the opposite direction, that dart leg is going to maintain in that down position. So once it's all pinned, let's head on over to our machine and get this stitched up. We are going to stitch them on the sides and the shoulder seams, and then don't forget to finish the edges. So backstitch at the start and the end here, and use a seam allowance that you set out when you were drafting that pattern. In my case, it's 3/8 of an inch. So I'm just going in and stitching that all the way down. And then you want to finish those seams. I'm going to be using my overlocker or serger, but you could just as easily do a zigzag to finish those seams or a French seam. So you can see I've got that all completed right here. Next, we are going to press those shoulder seams towards the back of the bodice. And then I like to use my sleeve roll as well to press those side seams. I also like to press them to the back. Now for the sleeves. So with the sleeves, we do have a definitive front and back. So make sure those notches are there. Then with right sides together, pin your sleeve and stitch the length of the under sleeve right here. And with that, we're going to stitch it and then finish it with your serger or zigzag stitch like so. And then you are going to want to press it. I like to press mine towards the back. I find it's a good habit to get into always pressing it towards the back. So that seam on the shoulder, it went to the back. Your underarm sleeve, it goes to the back. That side seam, it goes to the back. Next, change your stitch length to the longest stitch setting. In my case, that's 5 millimeters. Grab a long thread tail and do not backstitch. Here we are going to create 2 rows of long stitching between the notches. So the single and the double notches on the sleeve. There will be another notch that denotes the middle of the sleeve, and you are going to start not in the middle of the sleeve, but on the end that denotes the front of the sleeve at that notch. So it should look like this with your 2 thread tails that when you pull them will gather your sleeve up like so. So take your bodice piece here and then flip your sleeve right side out. And then we are going to match up the sleeve with right sides together, and be sure that you're matching up the single notch on the sleeve to the single notch or the front of your bodice. And then that double notch is going to match up to the double notch on the back of your bodice. And that single notch in the center of the sleeve that I talked to you about earlier, that is going to match up to your shoulder seam. And once you've got that pinned in place, pin the seam along the bottom to match up to the side seam. Then you can go ahead and pull those gathering stitches and pull in any of the excess ease that you have in the sleeve cap. And this will get you perfectly distributed gathers every time on your sleeve. And it really helps you to know how you're going to be distributing this fullness. Stitch it and finish it. I serged mine in this instance. And your sleeves will look just like so. It is really starting to take shape. And we just have one more thing to do, and that is the sleeve cuffs. So we're just going to stitch them together, and then we're going to place them wrong sides together so that you've got the right side of the fabric outward. We're going to stitch 2 rows of gathering stitches for the bottom of the sleeve because, of course, this is a voluminous sleeve, and we want to gather that into the cuff. First, I match up that under seam on the sleeve with the seam on the cuff because, of course, we want that to be on the bottom of our sleeve so you don't see it. And then I match the top and then just gather in using those gathering stitches. Just keep pulling on the threads so that it gathers up just like so, and just distribute all of those gathers evenly around that sleeve so you don't have too many gathers in one area. You want them to be very evenly distributed. Use as many pins as you need and then stitch and then serge. It's as simple as that. And you can see this side is done, and just give it a nice good press. Now for the V neckline. So with this, we are going to place those facing pieces together. I'm placing them right sides together along the shoulder seam. And then we're just going to stitch this together once we have that all done. So give it a nice good stitch. And then I am going to press them open, so don't serge these seams. We want it to lie as flat as possible on your blouse, so you don't want to add any additional bulk by serging that. But do go ahead and serge all the way around this facing. Now, anything that you're stitching in the round, if you're using a serger, you're going to have to secure those thread tails by just weaving it back in through that stitching, pulling it out, and then clipping it. So you would do the same thing on the cuffs because that is done in the round as well. Then place your facing right sides together. First, I match up those shoulder seams because those are very easy to match up. And we want to make sure that they are spot on. And then, of course, we have our notches. So I go ahead and place the notches first, and then I distribute that ease within the facing and pin it all. And then we're going to stitch it all in place. No need to serge or zigzag. Go ahead and clip that V, and then in the back, you'll notice that we have a curve. We want to clip that so it lies nice and flat. And so clip up to those stitches, but do not clip through those stitches. The next thing we're going to do is understitch. So we're going to fold our seam allowances towards that facing. So we're going to do that by pressing it. So I'm just getting out my sleeve roll because it's nice and handy. And when you're working on a curve, using a pressing hem or a sleeve roll will be your best friend. So go ahead and press those seam allowances towards the facing, because in our next step for the understitching, we are going to stitch all along that, grabbing in all of those seam allowances. But what this does is it allows the fabric to roll back towards that facing so that it doesn't show and it lies beautifully. So you can see I have went ahead and stitched that in place. So when I turn it right side out, it'll look like so. Now this one, you do want to get your pressing hem. It's the perfect shape to do that neckline edge. So go ahead and press it and get everything set in place as it should be. And once that is done, the next thing you want to do is secure that facing in place. So I like to secure it by stitching in the ditch along the shoulder seam. So I am just going to match up those shoulder seams. I'm just feeling through my fabric from the wrong side, and then I'm going to place a pin in there. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side by the shoulder. I'm just going to place a nice little pin in there, and then I'm going to stitch in the ditch. Now for the hem. This is the home stretch. I went ahead and serged the bottom. This is optional. The reason I do this is that way I don't have to use a seam gauge for my pressing, and it makes it so much easier. So the way that I calculated my hem is I know exactly how wide my overlocker stitch is, and I like to do a double hem on that, and then I just fold that over, and it is so much faster. But depending on what you set your seam allowance for, that's how much you're going to do your double hem. So when you do set that seam allowance, do be sure to consider the fact that you will be rolling it over 2 times in order to conceal all those raw edges. I'm just going in and adding some pins, and then we're going to top stitch this. So I just go in and top stitch, and I like to do this type of top stitching from the wrong side. And it is all done, and our shirt is pretty much ready for the reveal. Are you ready to see what it looks like on? Let's see.
Let it go, what's the use in holding on? Can we find a way where we could spend some time alone? You know where to find me, you know which way to go. As long as you love me, we'll be singing all night long.
And there you have it. We are all done this blouse. This one really does come together in a snap. I enjoyed taking you on this sewing journey, and if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments down below, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And head on over to Minerva and create an account if you haven't done so already. It is free to do so, and you can interact with a lot of other makers and creatives, see some of the projects they're working on, and share some of yours. And if you're interested in checking me out, you can find me on Minerva at Sheer Stitchery, and I'll link my profile down below. As I mentioned earlier, everything that I mentioned in this video is linked down below, all of the fabric and patterns, and I will see you next time.